The Lake St Lucia Estuary is part of the Isimagaliso Wetland Park, South Africa's first World Heritage Site. The St Lucia Estuary has a history of human interference dating back to the early 1950s. It receives most of its fresh water from 5 rivers. In the north, these rivers are Umkhuze, Mzinene, Hluhluwe, and Nyalazi. The Umfolozi enters the system in the south at the estuary mouth. Before human interference, the St Lucia Estuary mouth had the following configuration: the Umfolozi River and its smaller tributary, the Umsunduzi near the High Mapelane Dune, and a large intertidal basin where the rivers join the estuary. By the 1950s, the St Lucia Estuary's largest catchment, the Umfolozi, had been extensively transformed in its lower reaches for commercial sugarcane farming. Farming activity extended into the lower reaches of the floodplain, which is in the estuarine functional zone. Farming led to the drainage and loss of large wetland areas and reed beds, the canalization and straightening of the lower reaches of the Umfolozi River, and a drainage system on the floodplain to prevent damage from flooding. In 1951, the St Lucia Estuary mouth closed naturally due to low rainfall and low water levels in the estuary. This caused water levels to rise behind the sandbar, pushing water into the previously intertidal and drier areas of the estuarine functional zone, a natural process commonly known as backflooding. Although this was natural, at the time it was thought to have been caused by the silt in the canalized Umfolozi River, and was believed to pose a threat to the Lake St Lucia Estuary. In 1952, in order to remove this perceived threat, the Umfolozi River was separated from the estuary. The separation was achieved by diverting the Umfolozi River into the sea near Mapelane, also preventing the inundation of the sugarcane farms. This meant that the Umfolozi no longer flowed into the estuary, but straight out to sea. The Umfolozi River migrates naturally northwards. This movement was prevented by artificial breaching in the south near Mapelane and the construction of a levee in the path of the Umfolozi. The single natural mouth had been replaced by 2 artificially created separate mouths, one for the St Lucia Estuary and one for the Umfolozi River. The Umfolozi River was no longer able to play its important role in determining when and where the St Lucia Estuary mouth would open, with the result that the estuary mouth closed more frequently and for longer periods. The disruption of these natural processes had ecological consequences. With more frequent mouth closure, there was concern about the loss of estuarine function, and there were attempts to keep the St Lucia Estuary mouth permanently open to the sea. Because the Umfolozi River was no longer removing sediments that were brought in by the sea, extensive dredging of the estuary mouth and narrows to remove these marine sediments followed. The dredge spoil was deposited on the banks of the St Lucia Estuary, and also in the natural path of the Umfolozi, to prevent it from rejoining the estuary. There were a number of unsuccessful attempts to supply fresh water to the St Lucia Estuary without Umfolozi sediments. These included the dredging of a series of canals and the building of an intake works on the Umfolozi River. This changed a previously dynamic aquatic habitat into a stable terrestrial one. Tropical storms Domoina and Mboa struck the KZN coast in 1984. These powerful storms damaged the intake works Dolose and Groins out to sea and washed the dredges. This led to a management review, and the use of hard infrastructure was abandoned. However, the Umfolozi River's natural northward migration was still managed through artificial breaching near Mapelane to maintain its separation from the St Lucia Estuary mouth. Its natural course northwards towards the St Lucia Estuary also continued to be blocked by placing dredge spoil in its path, until the last dredge stopped operating in 2006. Between 2003 and 2012, the area experienced a drought. During this period, the lake dried out, losing 90% of its surface area. This had never happened before. The estuary mouth closed and remained closed for 10 years. interfering with the life cycles of estuarine-dependent marine species, causing the collapse of the prawn fishery and a decline in fish numbers up and down the coast. The salinity gradient also reversed, and the lake became extremely salty furthest from the sea in the north, where very few animals were able to survive. Under natural conditions, we know that the Lake St Lucia Estuary would have closed during such a drought, but it is unlikely that it would have stayed closed for such a prolonged period. By 2011, independent scientific research had shown that these effects were largely due to the loss of the Umfolozi River from the St Lucia Estuary. On the basis of this research, the Isimagaliso Wetland Park Authority adopted a new management strategy that would allow the Umfolozi River to follow its natural path back into the St Lucia Estuary. As a first step in 2011, Isimagaliso and Westville KZN Wildlife removed some of the dredge spoil that had been placed in the path of the Umfolozi River. This action resulted in the Umfolozi River flowing into the St Lucia Estuary once again. Further multidisciplinary studies, funded by the Global Environment Facility, confirmed that water from the Umfolozi was critical for the estuary as a whole, and that its connection to the St Lucia Estuary should be restored. The research also showed that the Umfolozi controlled the natural cycle of opening and closing of the St Lucia Estuary mouth, and its sediments pose little long-term threats to the estuary. It recommended the removal of the dredge spoil that had been placed in the Umfolozi's natural path, and that the diversion of the Umfolozi into the sea at Mapelane be stopped. The removal of the dredge spoil was initiated in 2016. It was removed down to sea level and deposited in the safe zone where it was dispersed by ocean currents. By the end of the project, approximately 1.4 million cubic meters of dredge spoil had been removed. The project has begun to restore the estuarine functioning of the Lake St Lucia Estuary, recreating the conditions that support the area's spectacular biodiversity and conservation value. This in turn directly supports economic activity and livelihoods in the area. Within 15 kilometers of St Lucia Estuary, there are 80,000 people that rely on its natural resources for their survival. The St Lucia Estuary is a significant tourism attraction for Isimagaliso, and its restoration is expected to contribute towards ongoing economic development and employment in the area.